I think, as you can see from the slides that Danny showed just now, if he is the war map act, then I think I'm going to have to struggle. I think one of the things I love about Danny's work is he puts, in some ways, very simple ideas in a very different way, and allows you to think about problems and challenges in a way that maybe you're not used to. And so what I really want to do, just in the short time I have, is to develop a couple of thoughts from his presentation, but then also to just try and sort of move it on, particularly in the context of some of the challenges facing this alliance. So I'm going to talk a bit about some policy reflections and then just talk briefly about next steps. So first of all, some reflections. The national is local. The point here is really that when we think about national policy, we have a tendency to average out local differences. There's a saying amongst statisticians, if my head's in the oven and my feet are in the freezer, then on average I'm comfortable. And I think that kind of points to an important fact that when you think about averages, what you lose out on is the complexity at the local level. And that complexity confounds that averaging out at a national level. There was a point that Sarah made this morning in her presentation about one of the focus for the T2A Alliance on the localism agenda. And that's very important because it's going to be very important, I think, in the coming period to think about policies that can be developed in such a way that are responsive to and calibrated with the complexity of local differences and are also grounded in a very clear understanding of their underlying causes. But it's also going to be important that those local strategies are not simply local delivery for national strategies. They need to have their own identity, they need to have their own flexibility and relate to local characteristics. But as I said, also be clear about where the underlying causes for those kind of problems that Danny was talking about just now. And of course, those challenges, those local challenges, are the product of decisions that are taken at a national and international level. Danny gave a number of examples of how that works out at a local level. There was a piece in the Financial Times just last week, which was an interesting piece. You can get it online. You have to register, but it's a free registration. It's the calendar of cuts and costs about to kick in. It was published last Friday. And it's a really good sort of summary of all the things that are going to be starting to kind of come through as a result of the spending squeeze. And I'll just pick out a few just as examples. So from April, local housing allowance rate to be capped at £250 for a week for one-bedroom property, £400 a week for 4 bedrooms or more. Benefit deductions for non-dependents will be increased, meaning claimants who have adult children living with them will be hit. Indexation of all benefits, tax credits and public service pensions to be in line with the consumer price index rather than the retail price index. In other words, there will be a slower rate of growth. Universal child benefit is frozen. The withdrawal rate for tax credits is increased to 41%. Second income threshold for families, element of child tax credits to fall. Then from September, the educational maintenance allowance, worth £30 a week for low-income students, will be withdrawn. People on non-active benefits start paying full fees for further education courses. From October, local housing allowance rate to be set at a 30th percentile. And then, of course, next year, October next year, tuition fees start kicking in. And already we're seeing, a lot of universities that Danny mentioned, the Russell Group, a lot of universities are already saying, we're going to charge £9,000 a year. Now, these national policies, and we can argue about the rights and wrongs of them, these national policies will work their way out and be experienced very differently in different areas. And it's going to be important in that context that we can develop a clearer awareness of the differential impact on localities of these national decisions and develop coherent policy responses. And what that means is we do need to develop a national perspective on the local. A multiplicity of local initiatives won't deliver the needed solutions. What you'll just end up with lots of fractured attempts to deal with things which actually are a result of much bigger level decisions. So that's the first two. The national is local, the local is national. Young adulthood, process, not event. Well, Kevin already mentioned this morning that the young adult age band represents a gradual process of maturity. And I think that's a really important point always to remember. And I think I can remember, I've been involved on and off in the T2A Alliance for some years, and I think the Barrack Trust can take a lot of credit for really championing this, because I think it's an area which was overlooked, there's no doubt about it, and a lot more people are now talking about this age group and about the particular challenges they face. What we also have to remember is that young adulthood is itself a very dynamic process of becoming and unbecoming. At the time of the last general election, there were around 7.5 million young adults, aged 16 to 24. As Anna pointed out earlier, that's about 10% of the population, which is a significant chunk of people. Now, there's going to be roughly the same number by the time of the next general election, 2015, assuming the coalition government gets that far. But there's going to be enormous churn in that. About 3.5 million children will have become and grown into young adulthood, and a similar amount, possibly a bit more, maybe closer to 4 million, are likely to have grown out of young adulthood. It strikes me as really important that policy responses can engage in the dynamism of that process, that we're thinking seriously not only about those people who are young adults now, but those who are going to become young adults, and those who are going to stop becoming young adults but won't necessarily stop having needs and challenges that need to be addressed and looked at. The fourth point, history matters. I mean, I started thinking about this particularly in the context of the graph that Danny showed just near the beginning about the prison population, which I myself, I've worked in this area for a number of years, and I forget that there was a period in this country within living memory of, I won't say some people in this room, but certainly within living memory of people who are still alive, where we had a prison population a quarter of what it currently is. And we assume that an 80 to 90,000 prison population is somehow normal, but we don't really necessarily reflect on, well, why is it normal now? What's changed socially, politically, economically, historically, to make that the new normal? Kevin again highlighted the issue about how the experience of young adults compared with my generation, others' generation, and the current generation, how that's itself a very changed set of circumstances. Well, what do we make of those big social changes? Why do we think they've happened? Why do we think that the lived experience of young adults is so different now than it was in my generation and in previous generations? Do we just accept that as the new normal? I think we need to think a lot more carefully and more seriously about the kind of social processes that are going on here, which are changing the lived experiences of individuals. The centrality of criminal justice. In her introduction this morning, Anna talked about the young adult population, about 10% of the national population, but disproportionately the subject of criminal justice interventions, about 30%. What that tells me is that the criminal justice system is very good at making young adults disproportionately part of their client group. But as Susan pointed out this morning, that doesn't necessarily mean that they are the more criminal. What that tells us is that there are a set of social institutions, the criminal justice system, that are very good at managing and controlling certain people deemed troublesome, and a disproportionate number of them are young adults. I think that's an important starting point for reflecting on what we feel differently, how we feel the criminal justice system should be different and what it's there to do. Because I have real concerns about attempts to make the criminal justice system more effective at helping young adults. So whatever we feel we should be doing in terms of improving the outcomes of young adults in the criminal justice process, we also need to develop policies which are about stopping them being part of the criminal justice process. And this brings me on to my final point about the marginality of criminal justice. In its publication back in 2005 that launched this alliance, Lost in Transition, the Barrack Trust pointed out, and I just quote from that report, criminal justice policies in England and Wales do unnecessary damage to the life chances of young adult offenders and often make them more, not less likely to reoffend. They make it harder for young adults to lead crime-free lives and exacerbate the widespread problems of social exclusion and other government policies. I was reminded of that this morning in Susan's presentation, where she, my reading of one of the things she was saying, I'm not sure she's still in the room, I was hoping to catch her, is that the engagement with the criminal justice system is in and of itself criminogenic. And perhaps we need to take that point a bit more seriously. But in a later publication, Universities of Crime, which was published a couple of years ago by the Alliance, we read the following. Young adults should be recognised as distinct from the adult population on account of their developmental stage and because of economic, social and structural factors that specifically impact upon them. Well, we saw a lot of that in Danny's maps just a minute ago. And it goes on to say, we should not be surprised that the current approach yields such poor results in diverting young adults away from crime. We should be appalled by it. Now, those statements and those perspectives strike me as absolutely vital for this alliance as it's moving forward and to develop the implications of that. I was really struck by the film we just saw, and I mean some amazing work going on in those pilots, and my congratulations to all those involved. They sound like some truly inspirational projects. And one of the individuals who was on the film, I think her name is, so it was all very quick, but I think her name was Dilberin. And my apologies if I haven't pronounced that correctly. But she said the great thing about this project for her was it treated her as a person, not as an offender. And that strikes me as being quite vital for any working with those caught up in the criminal justice process. Because at the end of the day, they're individuals with their own biographies, their own histories, their own lives, their own expectations. And the fact that they are labelled as an offender by a set of processes that we call the criminal justice process is just one of those identities, but they have many other. And it's very important that we seek always to champion and engage in the person as a whole rather than just their narrow legal definition. There is, of course, though, a bigger picture beyond those caught up in the criminal justice process. Danny, I think, made the very strong point that the variation now in life chances for young adults in this country are profound. And we face very uncertain times. Indeed, we face a situation where the whole generation now going to be growing up in very difficult circumstances which could last for years. And whilst we think about what we need to do within the terms and context of the criminal justice system and also those caught up in it, we also need to situate that within a broader vision about young adults as a whole within society and the pressures and challenges that they're going to face in the years to come. Thank you very much. Sorry, I got ahead of myself there. I must very quickly talk about next steps. Very simple. We want to continue this conversation today, and I'll be around afterwards, and I'd love to sort of hear everyone's thoughts on this. But coming out of this particular piece of work, we're going to be publishing 2 briefings on young adults in transition, one looking at the national picture, which will be a summary of a lot of what we've been discussing today, and then one will be aiming to drill down to look at more detail at some local areas and to kind of try and explore some of the differences between those areas. Thank you.